Tonight's topic is homosexuality preventable and treatable? And our host is Frank Russo, State Director, AFA of New York.
Good evening and welcome, everyone. Tonight's topic, I think, should be of great interest to many people. Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons is a practicing psychiatrist with over 25 years of experience who did his residency at the Hospital of the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. Dr. Fitzgibbons is Director of Comprehensive Counseling Services in Pennsylvania and serves on the staff of the International Institute of Forgiveness in Madison, Wisconsin. He has been widely published and has done extensive research in the areas of anger, depression, and cognitive therapy. Dr. Fitzgibbons has also written extensively on the subject of homosexuality or same-sex attraction disorder. He is the co-author of Homosexuality and Hope and has written a chapter in the book Homosexuality in American Public Life, edited by Christopher Wolfe. Welcome, Dr. Fitzgibbons.
It's good being with you.
And joining me in the questioning is Patty Knapp.
Thank you, Frank. Welcome again, Dr. Fitzgibbons. We hear so much lately about gender identity disorder, and a lot of parents feel that they notice something in their children very early on, where the girl is playing with mostly boy things, or doesn't want to wear dresses, and the boy is playing with dolls. Tell us your view of this thing called gender identity disorder.
Sure. Patty, well, gender identity disorder is a disorder that children have. And it's a disorder in which the child fundamentally rejects his own masculinity or femininity and backs into the other sex, so that a boy would only want to play with dolls, would find involvement with male activities like sports or bonding with males painful. He's painful in that world. Similarly, a young female would find the same type of pain in the feminine world. So there's something, this is not normal. Many of these mothers of such children take their children to pediatricians, and the pediatricians say, oh, you have nothing to worry about. Nothing could be farther from the truth. They do have something to worry about, because boys like that in particular, girls to a lesser degree, will be picked on at school. They'll feel isolated, they'll feel sad, they'll feel insecure because they're not comfortable with their own God-given identity.
Now, what is the incidence of a child like that having been molested as a child or a teen? This child who gets picked on, and maybe the boy who's termed a wimp isn't interested in sports and,
Yes.
and rejects his masculinity.
I don't think the origin, in my clinical experience over 25 years working with large numbers of these children, the origin doesn't seem to reside so much in the fact that they have been sexually abused. They are potential victims of sexual abuse, however. This is another reason why they're a prey. They become a prey to older homosexuals, males in particular, who would prey on young adolescents. Yeah, vulnerable, who they view as vulnerable adolescents. But the most common cause in the male for gender identity disorder is the lack of eye-hand coordination. That sounds almost impossible to believe. But the reality is, if you don't have eye-hand coordination, that is, if you can't throw a baseball smoothly, coordinate to kick a soccer ball, play basketball, you begin to feel from the time you're 3 or 4 years old, isolated, withdrawn from the male world, rejected, fearful of entering the male world, which unfortunately in this culture is overly identified with sports. So for males, it's more the sports issue. For females, the more complex factors, not bonding with the mother, rebelling against the father, or craving the father's acceptance, or other factors. But I work more with males than with females on this issue.
What are some of the symptoms of this gender identity disorder? What symptoms would you detect?
Well, they would begin with the fact that the boy's friends would be basically females. He would have very few male friends. That he would avoid athletic activities. That he might even like feminine dress. He might even prefer look at feminine makeup, for example. So he would identify excessively with the feminine. And then in his relationships, this boy would tend to be somewhat isolated from males. He might, oftentimes these children, if this is not addressed, these children are regularly picked on, which is an extremely painful experience for children at school. Many of the children, children will not tell their parents they're being picked on. Why? Because they're ashamed of it. So if a parent sees a child who is overly isolated, has few friends, you need to raise this issue. Are children picking on you at school? Talk to the teachers at school about this and to explore different issues that may be going on in his or her life.
And what about for a young girl?
Well, for a young girl, there would be a tendency to not want to ever wear dresses, to have only male friends, to be sort of angry with the feminine world. And some parents, again, ignore this. It's a great mistake to ignore this. This needs to be addressed because it points to a lack of appreciation for their own God-given masculinity or femininity.
Now, let's say a patient comes in, or a mother or father comes in with a child that they feel might be suffering from this gender identity disorder. How is that treated?
Well, it's treated in several different ways. In the boys, one of the most important things you do is to get the father more involved. It's quite remarkable when you get the father involved how quickly this turns around in males. You get the father much more involved in the boy's life. You get him affirming his masculinity, touching him more, hugging him more, praising him more. And for those boys who aren't good in sports, and most of these boys are not good in sports, the father will talk to the son and tell him, look, athletic activity is no big deal. You know, the culture makes it seem like it's everything to masculinity. Sports does not determine masculinity, okay? And the father tells the boy that directly. If there's a Judeo-Christian background, he tells him, your masculinity is a gift from God. You know, it's a God-given gift, you know, and it's not determined by the culture. It's determined by God and, of course, by the father. The father is the major determinant of a male's sense of his masculinity. So the more the father gives to him, and he may criticize some of the more feminine mannerisms, feminine behaviors, then this type of behavior can be extinguished in children rather quickly. I mean, if it's been there for years, not uncommonly, a year, 2 years, you extinguish the behavior primarily because of the father's involvement.
So if the father is absent then, which is the case in a heavy percentage of our families today, unfortunately, and this young boy has this problem, then what happens?
I have several cases just like that, where the grandfather can play a tremendously important role. An uncle can play an important role. A male teacher can play a wonderful role, or a coach.
But it's important for the mother to get this male involvement from some significant relative.
It is. But again, those I treat who are Christians, and some, well, Christians in particular, they will sometimes tell their child that God is your other father. Your own father is not here for various reasons, but you have another father, God. If they're Catholic, then we recommend meditating or bringing in the whole concept of St. Joseph. You have another loving father. My father lost his father at the age of 4. Spanish flu of 1918 killed 20 million people in the world roughly. And my father would tell me later that for him, priests became his role. He looked at priests. An altar boy, he got that sense of identification with them, which strengthened his sense of masculinity.
That's very powerful, because what you're saying about gender identity disorder, it's very contrary to what we hear in the pop culture. I think most psychologists tell people, as you were saying, to just ignore it, that it's no big deal.
There's a lot of controversy about this. There's a book, Gender Identity Disorder, by 2 Canadians, Zucker and Bradley. And they recommend, as do a number of researchers in this country, you should treat it. Others are saying, in the literature, in the journals of child and adolescent psychiatry, you shouldn't treat it. People tend that it's still a disorder, so people are now basically supporting its treatment, although there's a school attempting to undermine its treatment, while at the same time ignoring the significant psychological damage. You can't, if you say it shouldn't be treated, then you are in fact enabling that child to go through major emotional trauma with his peers.
Have you seen any pattern of common emotional causes?
For gender identity?
Well, same-sex attraction.
Oh, now we're moving on. Okay, let's move on to it, because it is these boys in particular with gender identity disorder who, by the time they get to be 10 or 11, will find themselves being more attracted to males. You see, they haven't had their male acceptance by their peers. They've been isolated. So by the time they're 10 or 11, or earlier even, they begin to have attractions to other males. They want to be close to them. They may want their masculinity. They may unconsciously want their bodies. They want to be close to them, and then that can become eroticized. Then that shifts over to a sexual attraction to that other male. That child can mistakenly think, oh, I am homosexual. They're not really homosexual. They're having same-sex attractions because of the emotional pain associated with a gender identity disorder or an absent father.
Now, is there any indication, any link between mental illness and same-sex attraction that's been found in the research lately?
Well, this is a good question. In the last 2 years, in the American Medical Association's Archives of General Psychiatry, there have been 3 major studies published. 2,400 adults from the Netherlands, 1,200 children from New Zealand followed 20 years, and 101 twins, male twins. And what they found in these studies was that those in the homosexual lifestyle, in homosexual-friendly countries, the Netherlands and New Zealand, those in the homosexual lifestyle had 3 to 5 times more psychiatric illness than those who were heterosexual.
Wow.
So this new research, even
Can you say that again? Now,
those in the lifestyle, for
right.
example, the Netherlands, 2,400 adults, those in the lifestyle study had 3 to 5 times more psychiatric illness, depression, anxiety disorders, the children in New Zealand had 4 to 5 times more conduct disorders, depression, suicidal thoughts, than those who were not in the lifestyle. The twins, similarly, 5 times more. So this most recent research is flying in the face of politically correct thinking, which says there's no difference. When in fact, the more recent research is showing that there is difference, and even in the past, the research showed rampant promiscuity, inability to make commitment. These are some of the major reasons why, prior to 1973, homosexuality was diagnosed as a disorder.
Let me get back to that 1973 change. One of the psychiatrists, one of the leading psychiatrists who played a role in the removing homosexuality from the list of disorders was Dr. Robert Spitzer.
Yes.
Played a major role in this. I'm reading now over the past several years that he has been having a change of heart on this, and that he's done his own research now regarding specifically the treatability of homosexuality.
Yes.
I mean, if it's not a disorder, why do you treat it? Obviously.
Yes.
But if it is a disorder, then it's, so he sees that it is treatable. He's starting to look into this, and I think he's starting to conclude that homosexuality is treatable. I don't know if you've ever met or talked to Dr. Spitzer.
I have.
You have?
I have. I've talked to him about his research.
Oh.
What happened?
The recent research.
The recent research, that's right. He's a professor at Columbia University, Department of Psychiatry, distinguished psychiatric researcher. He was at an American Psychiatric Association meeting in Washington. There were people outside picketing. They were former homosexuals. They were picketing their right to treatment. They were attempting to pass a resolution stating that psychiatrists like myself should not be allowed to treat people who come into therapy who want treatment.
Who the people not picketing? They were
picketing, supporting the right to treatment.
Right, and people inside were arguing against treatment?
That's right. The American Psychiatric Association were arguing that someone like myself should not be permitted to give treatment, okay? That already exists in some countries in the world. So he went over to talk to them and was so impressed by them, they essentially said to him, study us. Study us. We're not homosexual anymore. Study us. So he studied 200 men and women. They're out of the lifestyle 5 years. And what did he find? He found that in those who were treated 5 years post-treatment, that 60% of the men were basically heterosexual and 40% of the women were basically heterosexual.
Wow.
That's pretty powerful.
And he also said this. He also said, I was talking about the 1973 decision. He headed the task force that removed
Can I just hold you up, because we're at the midpoint. I want to get to this because I'm very interested in Dr. Spitzer. We're at the midpoint of our program. You're watching the American Family Association Presents. Our guest tonight is Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons. We're discussing the subject of, is homosexuality preventable and treatable? We've got a brief public service announcement. Please stay with us. We'll be right back.
Too bad, no, was it?
Welcome back. Again, you're watching the American Family Association. We're discussing whether homosexuality is preventable and treatable. Our guest is Dr. Richard Fitzgibbons. And I was just asking Dr. Fitzgibbons about Dr. Robert Spitzer, who played the key role in removing, or a major role in removing homosexuality from the statistical list of disorders.
That's right.
And you were going on. I'm sorry for the interruption.
Well, I was just saying that when he was doing this research recently as to whether homosexuality is treatable, we were talking on the phone about this. And he said to me, in 1973, when we removed it from the diagnostic manual, our basic goal was to try to be compassionate. We were never trying to suggest that homosexuality is equivalent to heterosexuality. That was never. It's been taken to that point, but we never meant to suggest that the two were equivalent.
Unbelievable. I've never heard this before. I mean, that's, it's argued so widely that homosexuality is just, quote, an alternative lifestyle of equal merit to heterosexuality. Mind-boggling. But now Dr. Spitzer's research, has he I've seen pictures of these or advertisements with these 800 or so young people, basically in their 20s and 30s, 40s, former homosexuals, have gone through the treatment, and now allege that they're no longer homosexual.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that? And
I am. Well, I've seen over the past 25 years of my own practice, several hundred men and women I've worked with who are no longer homosexual.
who were homosexual
Who
once practicing?
I mean, my own view is there's no such thing as a homosexual person. Homosexuality is a symptom of an underlying emotional conflict. And the most common underlying emotional conflict, as with children with gender identity disorders, is a craving in the males, is a craving for male acceptance. A craving for male acceptance first and foremost from their peers. Lacking eye-hand coordination, being isolated when young, so this inner emptiness, this craving for male love. It's this craving for male love from childhood and adolescence that leads to the rampant promiscuity in the lifestyle.
Is there any relation between boys growing up in single-parent home without a father at home, or is there no?
Well, that's an interesting question. Well, there's research showing, the major research is published from Sweden, comparing children from single-parent families with divorced families, that twice or three times the rate of depressive illness in those children. See, there's a sadness. Children need a father's love, so there could be more craving for father love, but the most common thing I see is the craving for pure acceptance. The pain these boys have because they're like children with gender identity disorders. Not that all these adult homosexual males have gender identity disorders, they don't. But some did, which can be prevented. That can be treated and prevented. And later, you can treat what I treat as the underlying loneliness, their sense of weak masculine identity, get that resolved and healed, and often has a spiritual component to that, as you do in treating compulsive alcoholic or substance abuse behavior, and the same-sex attractions resolve.
Okay.
You would think that any therapist that comes upon somebody in treatment that's grappling with these problems would have a moral or legal obligation to tell them about the research.
Well, this is a key issue, Patty. This is a very key issue today. When you're a therapist, you have the responsibility, and I think school psychologists do also, and I think school superintendents do also, and pediatricians do also, to provide informed consent. So today, all these schools, the AMA, the American Pediatric Association, school superintendents, school psychologists, are pushing young people, are providing homosexual affirming programs in the schools. You legally have, if you're going to do that, you have a responsibility to provide informed consent and say, here is the research from the Netherlands, from New Zealand, 101 twins, that shows the downside to the lifestyle, 3 to 5 times greater psychiatric illness. It's not being done. Some legal action needs to be taken toward the AMA, the American Pediatric Association, school superintendents, school psychologists, present the truth to these children and adolescents.
Yeah, because the programs in school now, it's absolutely widespread, and it's confirmed in the culture, the pop culture, so that children not only accept it and tolerate it, but homosexuality is almost praised.
It is praised. They're made to believe that it's equivalent, that homosexual relationship is equivalent to marriage. Nothing could be farther from the truth. Nothing could be farther from the truth in terms of instability, promiscuity, rampant promiscuity. Less than 9% of homosexual relationships last 3 years. And even those in which they're paired, there's research that show, even those that are paired, there's in males in particular, extraordinary promiscuity, even in paired relationships.
See, I think that's a very important point, because all I ever see in the mainstream media are the few couples that have been together for 20 years. And I think people think, well, then of course they should be able to adopt a child because they have a permanent loving relationship.
Yes.
But as you say, that's extremely rare.
Well, yeah, there was an article in one of the East Coast newspapers about a man who said, I have a Catholic homosexual relationship of 10 years and it should be validated by the church. A friend of mine wrote an article criticizing that. The two of them met. One night, the friend who wrote that article about being in the perfect relationship called my friend and said, my lover has taken someone to bed. My friend said to him, how many other men have you taken to bed over the past 10 years? And he said, oh, I don't know, 10, 50, maybe 100. And that's probably underestimated by a factor of 3 or 4.
Wow.
40 to more sexual partners a year is very common in many research studies of those in the lifestyle. Not everyone, but significant numbers.
Some years ago, and I remember reading about this, and it's alluded to even today, there was a researcher, I forget his name, who alleged that his research and study showed that homosexuality was genetic.
Yes, Dr. Barr.
What was his name?
Dr. Barr, B-A-R-R.
Okay, and something in the brain that he
that was
difference.
LeVay in the brain.
Oh.
Barr the genes, LeVay the brain.
Oh, so two studies, two different studies. Okay, they alleged, but neither study, my understanding, and this is what I'm asking about, neither study was ever able to be replicated.
Well, there was an attempt to replicate those studies, and in science, if there is a chromosomal disorder, you would expect in further studies for them to find it. Much larger studies were done of twins in Canada and no such chromosomal markers were found. Now, there may be a set of genetic factors that predisposes people to lack of eye-hand coordination. It wouldn't surprise me, a certain set of factors. We're talking maybe 2.5% of the population of males are homosexual, and that's roughly the percentage of children that don't have eye-hand coordination. But no one has determined a genetic or chemical cause of homosexuality, and yet there's a wealth of research and literature showing that there are major emotional factors that predispose people to same-sex attractions.
Major emotional factors.
Well, yes, for example, today in women, it's not so much the lack of acceptance by peers or a difficult mother relationship. For more women, it's the mistrust of men. It's the collapse of the marriage. It's, you know, fathers who were hostile and angry, and they grew up fearful of men. Men are very fearful of men, and they back into homosexuality because they're so fearful of trusting men.
So really this is something else that's an effect of the breakdown of the family.
Oh, the divorce culture, oh, absolutely. I think more and more young people are going to find themselves having same-sex attractions. Males, because there's no father to hold them and comfort them and affirm their masculinity. They want someone to affirm their masculinity. And females, because they've got a deep, what do all the long-term studies of the divorce show? Mistrust. Judith Wallerstein's books on divorce. Profound mistrust. Fear that loving relationships will not work.
So one of the factors that might contribute to lesbianism, it has to do with mistrust of males
Mistrust of
and
male love.
And male love.
Mistrust, profound. And you can understand that, too, in the sexual utilitarian philosophy. Many females have been used as sexual objects beginning in early adolescence into college, but many, by the time they're out of college, can't find a male. Yeah, I mean, let's face it, we have a huge problem in this culture of maturity in American males. Dr. Paul Vitz at NYU says the average American male reaches maturity at about 32 or 33 years of age. We have this selfishness, keep them young, keep me in sports bars, watching my sports, drinking my beer. They're much less ready to make a commitment to women. I worked a number of
Less
women.
responsible.
They're so frustrated finding a man they can trust that they back into homosexuality because they're so lonely.
So it's only common sense, really, that's showing up now in the research.
Yeah, another key problem today has to do with the clergy sexual abuse, but sexual abuse of minors in general. What do we know about two things? Is there any relation between homosexuals having been molested as children more so than heterosexuals were molested? And two, on the other side, are homosexuals more or less likely to molest children than heterosexuals?
Those are two tough questions. In terms of are homosexual males more molested more often than heterosexual males, it's not clear. I'm not sure the research is clear on that. Let me say this clinically. I've treated many males who were homosexually molested when as children. That is an extraordinarily traumatic event for a male. That profoundly damages your sense of your masculinity and confuses you about your masculinity. So yes, it could be a factor. In terms of are homosexuals more likely to commit sex abuse, the Family Research Council did a study recently stating that, you know, homosexuality, the prevalence is 2.5% of the males, not 10%, 2.5, international study.
No, that I'm aware, yes.
Repeated studies, and 2.5% of the males commit 30% of the cases of child sexual abuse.
Wow. So they are therefore upwards
So-
of 10 times as likely then,
Yeah.
or more really, to commit sexual abuse than, I mean, the priests who committed the sexual abuse by and large were homosexuals rather than pedophiles.
And the abuse was with adolescents. 95% of the abuse was not with children.
Right.
It was with adolescents. You have to understand there's a major movement in some aspects of the homosexual culture to have sex with adolescents. Why does that happen psychologically? My own view is this. Many of them, when they were teenagers, were isolated, alone, and they craved more male love. And so unconsciously to undo their sadness, their weakness from their masculinity, they're attracted to young males in the flowering of masculinity and entering adolescence. You know, perfect, you know, some of the perfect male bodies, and et cetera. So there's articles written, you know, I mean, there are journals of pedophilia advocating, you know, sex with young males. In fact, at one university, there was a professor who advocated this, wrote about this, and one of the psychiatrists the bishops rely on, viewed him as his mentor.
Wow.
Wow.
This man spoke at our Dallas meeting at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. We have a major problem in the church in terms who are the mental health professionals the church has relied upon in treating those with same-sex attractions. I'm afraid what's happened is many of them, those they rely on, give into the culture and simply say, don't be involved with children or teenagers, just be mature. Well, if you don't identify the underlying causes, you're not going to be able to do that, and that
You're
is
not
what's
getting to
happened.
the issue.
And that's what's happened.
That's a very good point. Dr. Fitzgibbons, let's just touch on briefly the issue of faith in treating patients with these problems. How important is that?
Well, when you treat compulsive behaviors in the mental health field, if there's a spiritual component, can be extremely helpful. For example, it was an attempt to treat substance abuse disorders simply with psychotherapy. Very few people got better. Once you brought in the 12 steps, a spiritual component, people made significant progress. We found the same thing. We do good psychotherapy to resolve people's emotional pain, to try to resolve it. But if you can bring in the spiritual component, that helps tremendously. For example, Patty, a sense that my sense of masculinity comes from God. God strengthened my sense of masculinity. A sense of God as another loving father. For the females who don't trust males, many of them work thinking, all right, there are all these mistrustful men, but there are trustworthy men out there. God, help me to feel safe with trustworthy men. So bringing a spiritual component into the healing process is extremely beneficial. Spitzer's study of these people, many of these people were, in addition to psychotherapy, were in like 12-step support groups to deal with compulsive sexual behaviors, get to the root problem, turn to God for help with the loneliness, the sense of weak masculine identity, the mistrust of men. Things happen.
So one reinforces the other, and really the therapy isn't complete without the faith component.
Well,
It sounds like you're saying.
Therapy gives you knowledge, but knowledge doesn't necessarily fill the emptiness, but a sense of another source of love, you see, or another source of affirmation for your sense of masculinity or femininity does fill the emptiness. And then you're comfortable with yourself. You don't want to be someone else. You're happy you're happy with your own masculinity or femininity.
Dr. Fitzgibbons, we've covered so much today in a half an hour. I know we could speak for a few more hours on these topics. It's been a powerful show. I want to thank you for being our guest tonight, and I want to thank our viewers with the American Family Association for joining us on tonight's program. We thank you for watching, and we ask you to tune in at the same time again next week. Thank you again, Dr. Fitzgibbons.
When's Daddy coming home? Soon.
Other news, negotiations broke down again.
Daddy! Daddy! Jared! Jared, wait! Come on. Ah!
You got me.
So how was work?
Brutal. One meeting after another. I got a ton to do tonight.
At the end of the day, when the weight of the world is upon you,
Daddy doesn't want to play. Hey!
isn't it amazing
All right.
how the weight of their love can lift you up again?
Hey, you guys coming to dinner? Hey, guys.
For a free brochure about rediscovering the joy of your children, call 1-800-A-FAMILY and focus on the family.
This program has been brought of New York. You can reach Dr. Richard F. Fitzsimmons at 1-610-397-0950. If you would like to receive AFA's free quarterly newsletter, just call or write us with your name and address. You may contact the AFA by writing us at P.O. Box 203, Fort Washington, New York, 11050, or calling us at 516-944-3544. You can also read our newsletter and see our TV schedule by visiting our website at www.afany.org. Your comments are welcome, and thanks for being with us.